We wanted to offer a quick video to go over the sizing and the donning of the harnesses that come with the Vector system. First things first, for the sizing, we'd like you to take a tape measure of the circumference of the abdomen about 2 inches below the umbilicus. So if you go to the umbilicus, go a couple inches below and take a circumferential measurement, that will give you the length that you can plug into the sizing chart that's in both the user's guide and in some of the training materials that will hopefully help you choose the right size harness. You'll get to where you can eyeball it pretty quickly and you'll be grabbing them off the shelf quite quickly. But if you want to run by the measurement, feel free to, again, measure 2 inches below the umbilicus, take that circumferential measurement, and that'll tell you the best starting size for that harness. When you see the harnesses, each of these sizes are color coded, which you notice here. So until you learn these colors and which size that represents, on the inside of each of the harnesses there is a tag where you'll notice that each of the sizes are circled on this tag. So with our perfectly capable model here, we're going to show you the anatomical landmarks that you should target when donning one of these appropriately in standing. Okay? So if your patient has the ability to don this in standing, you'll follow this process pretty similarly. Maybe you already have the harness in the D-rings of the actual Vector system, but if they have the ability to, we'll kind of don this like you're putting on a coat. So the arms will go in each of those holes, and one of the first places to start with donning this appropriately is the main belt that's on the lower abdomen. So you can make sure that all of your Velcro is undone, and if I'll turn you around just a little bit, kind of these wings on the back of this, we'll make sure that they're completely undone while you fit the rest of this. So with these wings undone, we'll come back to the front, and the starting point really for this main lower abdominal belt is on the pelvis, really the upper portion of the pelvis. And you want to make sure you're up above at least the greater trocaners so that you're not really minimizing or impinging or, again, restricting any hip flexion or hip extension. So you want to be able to move that hip joint freely and make sure that this abdominal belt is above that portion. So really about the belt line, where we typically will wear our belt, is a good place to put this abdominal wrap here. Now that you've started at the bottom, we'll kind of work our way up. These two tabs that are found on either side of the next step up on the upper abdominal portion here are really just to take the slack out of the netting that you see in the side and the back of it. So these don't have to be particularly tight beyond just taking up the slack against the abdomen and then letting these overwrap. Then of course the third of these main three belts along the abdomen is this piece up here that will target, really you can kind of think about like the xiphoid process or somewhere at that area there. Sometimes I've heard this, you might target where you might wear like an underwire, like on a bra, something about that height. If you do have a particularly barrel-chested person or a larger breasted woman, there's really not a load-bearing piece to this top belt. So if it needs to be left completely open or untied, it's possible with this belt, just so that it doesn't minimize any breathing, or if it's particularly like a bustier and is uncomfortable for a woman or a man to wear, this piece can be completely left open. But it is preferred, again, that you run it through the D-ring here on the side of the harness, then double it over itself and secure in the front. With these three main portions done, I like to go back down to the leg portions and wrap the thigh straps around the thigh. The target for these, at least proximo-distally, is to look to where we're not too distal and really right above the knee. When you start having any pulling on the actual attachments for the leg straps, if it's too distal, it can create a knee flexion or a knee extension moment. If it's too high, it can be a little uncomfortable riding up a little bit between the legs. So instead, we'd like to target really right in the middle of the femur, so to speak, and to make sure that the straps going down to the leg straps are somewhat straight up and down. We'll ask you to turn around if you don't mind. So again, this shouldn't be twisted in any way, one direction or the other. These straps from the main pelvic wrap down to the leg straps should just be directly down. So we'll show you this again from the back, if you don't mind turning just a little bit more. Again, about mid-shaft of the femur as far as the height of them. And again, just making sure that they're not particularly twisted in any way. If you suspect that you'll be doing a lot of maybe squatting exercises or some particular activity that you need a lot of hip and knee flexion, particularly the hip flexion, you might leave a little bit of extra length in the back of these. Of course, as we hip flex, if you can do like a standing hip flexion on this side, we get longer on the bottom. Can you do like an open kinetic change and bring your knee forward? Yeah, so obviously we get a little longer here in the backside. So if we need to allow for that kind of range of motion, you can leave these a little bit longer. If you're just doing gait or just doing some standing level activities, maybe cinch those down a little bit. Again, the leg harnesses are not really load bearing. They're just something to anchor the main pelvic portion of the belt, which is the load bearing portion of the harness. So again, these are more just to simply anchor the portion that is load bearing. So if you'll turn back around to the front, why I like to do the leg straps before we tighten these main wings or that big elastic band in the back is because now that I've done the leg straps, it gives me a handle with which to hang on to so that as I reach around to the back and pull this main thick elastic band, if I were to just do this, I could pull the patient off balance very easily, as you notice. So instead, if I can put my hand inside that strap going down to the leg strap, I can kind of counteract that force as I pull this back around and really tighten this up against the pelvis here. So again, I'll use the same hand strap here as well. It's actually a leg strap, but I put my hand through it and I grab that wing from the back and come across, and really you want to get this main elastic belt as tight as possible because most of that is really where the load bearing portion is going to be. It's going to be anchored here and transferred through some of the netting in the actual sides of the harness. And again, it shouldn't ride up a whole lot, even with a lot of force being pulled up for the dynamic body weight support. With this all set up, and we'll kind of have you take a slow 360 here, just to show you the back of this, you can kind of see how this sits just in the small of the back. As this begins to get pulled up in the body weight support, the advantage of having the netting like this is it works kind of similarly to one of those Chinese finger cuffs. As we apply the dynamic body weight support, and there's some translation of force upwards, it hugs his trunk very, very uniformly. So that's the function really of the netting. But with all of that aligned, if we'll turn you back around, we're ready to lengthen the shoulder straps at the appropriate height. If you have the luxury of having a tall ceiling, you can let these out all the way, which we'll do there, and on this side as well. The main objective for the length of the shoulder straps is to make sure that your D-ring here is at the level, at least, of the hole in the ear, the external acoustic meatus. So from that level or taller, and again, this harness may slide up just slightly when we begin to distract it with some force from the dynamic body weight support. If the D-ring, the top of the D-ring is taller than the hole in his ear, that will allow for the carabiner and the spreader bar to clear his head and not hit him in the head. So again, as long as these two D-rings meet those heights, the spreader bar should not hit him in the head, and you should have adequate clearance above it. If your patient does not have the ability to stand and don the harness as we just described, you can put the harness on in the seated position. To do that, you'll want to position the harness maybe on a chair or on their chair. You maybe just lean them forward, slide this in behind them. But to line it up to where it will typically work well, you'll want to take the bottom of that main pelvic belt and set it at the top of the back of the seated surface. Okay, and again, because we typically are longer around our backsides when we're in that seated hip flexed position, you may want to lengthen the straps on the back of the pelvic portion that go down to the leg straps. That way, again, they'll sit in the leg, they'll sit on the leg. You know, if I were to sit down in this chair, we could wrap the leg portions around the middle of my femur, and lengthening the back of these allows us to do that. So if we had a patient that was able to sit down on this chair or be transferred to sit in this chair while we donned it, if they sat down and scooted to the back of it, where the main pelvic belt would hit them around their pelvis would be similar to what it would be if you were to do this in standing. Again, the main difference is that you do have the longer straps on the buttocks. So once you do get them and wrapped and all of the landmarks are still the same, once they are in the standing position, feel free to adjust if you need to, but the main thing is you'll want to kind of cinch down those straps that have been lengthened along the backside. But this is a good starting position to be able to put it on from the seated position. And then lastly, sometimes our patients will need to actually be fit with the harness in the supine position. We know we have different shaped patients, and if you have a patient that's a particularly large abdomen, sometimes it's difficult to get that main pelvic portion underneath a large abdomen in the seated position. So they don't have the ability to stand safely for the harness darning, and maybe they're too much of an odd position in the seated position. It's actually a very good application to don the harness in the supine position. So if you do that, the main thing is just to lay the harness out completely flat with all of the velcro completely undone. You'll want to measure the height of where you put the harness on the mat and where you lay them down on top of the harness to make sure that after you lay the patient on top of the harness, that main pelvic wrap will wrap around them at the height of that upper pelvis area. And again, you'll follow the same directions really as that we did in standing. The next will be the 2 tabs, then the one longer strap that goes through the D-ring. All of that will be done in supine. Then when they stand up, you have sort of captured them in that, maybe that larger abdomen is now inside the harness at an appropriate height than what might have been difficult to do in the seated position. So with that, you should be able to don those harnesses in the standing, seated, and supine positions.